If you're a student in Canada looking for your first credit card, there is a million options out there. But honestly, most of them are really just not worth your time. Let me explain. Well, first of all, you don't need a premium travel card. You also don't need a card that has a $500 a year annual fee. And you definitely don't need 3 different cards just because some guy on TikTok or YouTube, whoever, told you that this is the best setup out there. You are a student, right? So your biggest expenses are probably groceries, transportation, eating out, your phone bill, subscriptions, and if you drive, perhaps gas. So let's keep this simple. I'm going to go through some of the best Canadian student credit cards available. Of course, explain which one is good at what. Most importantly, I will tell you personally which one I would pick depending on which situation. Because look, there is no single best card. Because the best card for someone who lives with their parents and spends $100 a month on groceries is going to be very different versus someone who pays rent, car insurance, drives to school every day, and so on. Then there's one thing we should get out of the way. I'm sure considering you're watching this video, you already know this, but it's just a little disclaimer that's good to know, especially if you're a student watching this for the first time. And it all boils down to the fact that credit card is not free money. I know it's so obvious, but it's better to say it twice than to never say. Look, these cards have 21% interest rate. And this is why banks push them so hard and give you rewards, because they make so much money on this balance that you keep month over month if you only make minimum payments. Because you can earn $50 in rewards, for example, and lose $150 on interest with your free card. So once again, the whole point of this video is to find the best cards that make sense in terms of rewards if you pay them off every month. Which I should probably make a video about the low interest rate cards. That would be something to transfer your debt onto, but that's going to be a whole other video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's start with BMO Cashback Mastercard for students. I don't often recommend BMO. I don't think their credit card lineup is that great. However, this student card is probably one of the easiest ones to recommend to an average student. Because look, first of all, it has no annual fee, no income requirements, and best of all, it gives you 3% cashback on your groceries. Unfortunately, for some reason, BMO always does this to me. It really disappoints me with the cashback outside of this premium categories like groceries 3% and recurring bills at 1%. The rest of the categories is 0.5%. Again, if all you spend money on is groceries, and I feel like when I was a student, that's all I kind of bought for the most part, except for going out once in a while, it's not bad. But I do not know why they couldn't just do it 1% for all the categories. On top of that, this is actually more important. It's the $500 cap per category. And I'm personally not a fan of spending caps, but of course, you're a student and spending $500 on groceries, even with current grocery prices, it should be enough for a single person. Unless, of course, there are many ways to spend $500 at a grocery store, but it seems like it should be enough. You should be hitting that cap, or you should be within that cap every month. And, if you're putting more than $500 on it, like whether you have some sort of very powerful meal prep plan or you go as a group of friends or roommates to buy groceries, then of course, perhaps you should look elsewhere. But for a normal student, it makes sense. And for the sake of it, let's do a little bit of math. Because again, the numbers are not going to be mind-blowing, but they're still okay. So let's say you spend $300 a month on groceries. At 3% cashback, that's $9 every month. Over the course of the year, it's going to be $108. Let's just round it to $100. For no annual fee, in my opinion, that's actually pretty good. Obviously, it's not anything life-changing, but that's not the point. The point is getting pretty decent rewards, 3% cashback for something you were going to buy anyways. It's not like groceries is some sort of fun discretion spending. And this is the best thing about this card, right? As I said, it's the best for average student, simply because you don't need to think about it. And this is exactly what I want for my first credit card. I don't want a card that requires me to think constantly, because I don't want to remember which airline has the best redemption chart, or whether this 1 point that this bank gives me is worth 0.7 cents or 1.4 cents, depending on whether you redeem it against traveling or just a statement credit. I don't want to do that, right? I don't want to think of when the best time is to transfer these points to this airline to get the most out of it. I want to buy groceries and get my cash back. That's pretty much it. And this is why I think BMO Cashback Mastercard is so great. It's very boring, but in some cases, boring is actually a compliment here. Because when you're a student, the best credit card is not the highest theoretical reward for the most spending. It's the one you're actually going to use correctly. And another thing I like about it, obviously, is that the rewards are not locked behind some complicated travel ecosystem. like a lot of the point cards are. Instead, it's a cashback card, so all you're getting is cashback. For somebody who got their first credit card, it's a lot easier to understand. And easy is good. You already probably have so many exams, so much studying to do that you don't really want one more thing to worry about. Let's move on. Okay, this is a card a lot of students should be looking into before automatically applying for BMO. And of course, I'm talking about Tangerine Moneyback credit card. I made a full video on it if you want to take a look. But here's a general overview. Why this card is different is Tangerine lets you choose where your 2% cashback applies. What does that mean? Well, first of all, you pick two categories. And if you have your cashback deposited into a Tangerine savings account, it lets you open the third category. So you have three categories for which you will get 2% cashback. And the categories are really useful. I'm talking groceries, gas, restaurants, entertainment, recurring bills, public transportation, fitness, drugstores, and so on. So if there is a student who spends, let's say, $300 on groceries, $250 on restaurants and takeout, and $100 on public transportation, with BMO, great, you will earn 3% on groceries, but public transportation, 0.5%. Restaurants and takeout, again, you only get 0.5%. With Tangerine, instead, you choose those as your three categories, and you get 2% on each one of them. Now, of course, the grocery rate is lower than BMO, as I said, but instead of concentrating all your rewards in one category, you're earning 2% on three major parts of your budget. And this is where Tangerine kind of gets more interesting, because the question is not, is 2% better than 3? It's simply not the case. The question is 3% on groceries alone better than 2% on groceries, restaurants, and transportation? And that depends on your spending. And this is why blindly searching for the best student credit cards in Canada doesn't always cut it. You, first of all, need to look at your own spending. And now, of course, something to note for Tangerine, you don't earn 2% for everything. You pick the three categories, and everything else outside of the selected categories will earn 0.5%. So again, you actually need to use the bonus categories. But compared to BMO, Tangerine has a higher ceiling for someone with diversified student budget. I really like that, because depending on where you spend your money, you can set those to be your categories. So you build the card around yourself and your lifestyle. And every so often they let you change your categories. So, if you decide that, oh, actually now I spend more money here, you just switch it up. At this point, we have pretty serious competition, right? BMO does have a really nice 3% cashback, and Tangerine has much better breadth when it comes to different categories. Now let's take a look at a card that's somewhere in the middle. And of course, I'm talking about the CIBC Dividend Visa for students. It's probably the most interesting alternative to the first two. Why? Because CIBC essentially looked at what categories students spend the most money on and spread the rewards around them. You get 2% cashback on groceries and 1% on dining, transportation, gas, and some travel options by Expedia. Everything else earns 0.5%. And of course, there is no annual fee. And look, immediately, I do see the appeal here. It's just a simpler card. And so we have three cards. BMO gives you 3% on groceries. Tangerine gives you 2% on three separate categories. And CIBC gives you 2% on groceries plus 1% on a bunch of other categories automatically. You don't have to pre-select. So, if you don't want to go to Tangerine and constantly update your categories, CIBC one is a lot more straightforward. And let's do a hypothetical example again of a student who spends $400 a month on groceries, $300 a month on dining, $200 on transportation, $100 on recurring bills, and $500 on miscellaneous. With BMO, they will earn $16 a month. And with CIBC, $16.50 a month. So at the end of the year, CIBC makes it a little bit further simply because it has more categories at 1%. And honestly, the difference between these two, for example, is very small. At the end of the year, the CIBC, if you had a CIBC card, you would end up with $6 more than if you had the BMO one. While $200 a year reward is good, whether it's $6 more or less, doesn't really make much of a difference. So, a lot of people try to spend hours trying to decide between 2 or 3 cards when the difference at the end of the day is $20 in annual reward. It's absolutely not worth it. And, at the same time, they spend $500-$600 a month on eating out, for example. So all this time spent pondering is simply not worth it. But anyways, let's move to the next one. Of course, I want to talk about Scotiabank Scene Plus Visa for students. Not just because I love the Scene program or going to Cineplex, but that's one of the reasons. But look, it once again depends on what you do with your money and where you shop. Let me explain. So the Scene Plus Visa for students has no annual fee, and it earns you 2 Scene points per dollar spent at Sobeys, Safeway, Home Hardware, and Cineplex. Everything else you earn 1 point per dollar. There is often an offer, something like 5,000 points which is around about $50. And of course, you might say, well, Safeway is so expensive. But honestly, when I was in school, that was the only place I could get to by bus or by sea train, in my case, in Calgary, Alberta. And while going to Walmart would have been cheaper, I didn't have a car at the time, so spending, 2-3 hours of my day, probably longer than that, going to Walmart just to save $10-15 on groceries simply didn't make sense. So if I knew that, I wish I knew that, it would have been nice earning 2 Simplii points per dollar. But I just had a regular RBC Cashback card. Just 1% on everything. Actually, you know what? I just had a debit. I didn't even have a credit card. But anyways, I don't hate this card, as you can tell. But I don't know if it belongs to the top of the list for an average student. Once again, the rewards are pretty specific. It's not just a regular grocery store like the BMO offers you, or even Tangerine. This one says specifically Safeway or Sobeys, or I think there is a couple other brands, but it's essentially a much smaller umbrella than the entire grocery ecosystem. So if you already go to Cineplex, already shop at Safeway, that would probably be a great card. Otherwise, you might as well go for another cashback card on the list. Cashback would always technically be better than a points card, because while you can always redeem the points, the fact that you need, I believe, 1,000 Simplii points redeem, you need $10 at a time, it makes it a little bit more challenging. While the normal cashback redemption is also around about $10, but once you hit the $10 minimum limit, you can apply as much cashback as you want, versus here, it's all in $10 increments. So that just makes it a little bit less flexible. And of course, the earn rate is there, but it's not the most amazing, right? You get 2% essentially, 2% cashback in points for shopping at those grocery stores or going to Simplex. For the rest of the categories, you get 1% cashback in points. Whether it's worth it or not is, of course, for you to decide depending on where you spend your money, but it's not anything to necessarily write home about. And I've been thinking what to put for the last card on this list, and because it's not by any means a glamorous spot, I picked RBC Cashback Mastercard. Not because it's the best card, but because it was my first cashback credit card, or my first credit card, in fact. And I'm just a sentimental guy. And honestly, it's not too bad. It gives you 2% on groceries and 1% pretty much on all other categories. So it would be somewhere close to the CIBC credit card. It's kind of more or less the same. And it's a simple cashback card. You just tap it, you get 1% cashback or 2% on groceries. But it's RBC, the most valuable company in Canada, and it's the first card I've ever had, so I just had to put it on the list. Honestly, it's not bad, but it's not great. It's very much mid-tier for a student card. But you know what? Actually, for the last card, I'm going to pick the Simplii Visa. And of course, I made a video on it, but for a free card, it's pretty amazing. It has the highest, I think, in Canada, cashback on restaurants, bars, and coffee shops. And I think it goes to up to 5,000 annual limit, which should be okay. I think for you and me, that's that's close to $400 spending on eating out. I guess it depends on how often you go out, but once again, it's 4% cashback on those. And then you get 1.5% on drugstores, groceries, and so on. And you get 0.5% elsewhere. They have a small income requirement, but usually if you've had a summer job before you start school, for instance, you should be okay to qualify for it. So what's the verdict? In my opinion, if you're a student who spends most of your money on groceries, which I believe I was, BMO is probably your best bet, up to $500 a month. 3% on groceries for a no annual fee card is genuinely pretty good. On the other hand, if you're spending your money across multiple categories, once again groceries, but there's also transport and recurring subscriptions and so on, then perhaps Tangerine should be the one. If you want something in between, like a decent grocery reward, plus rewards on dining, transportation, and recurring bill payments without having to think about any category selection like you do with Tangerine, CIBC is perhaps fairly compelling. And of course, the Simplii Visa, that gives you 4% on restaurants, bars, and coffee. If you do a lot of that, it might end up actually bringing a lot more money. It also gives you 1.5% on groceries, gas, and a lot of other things. So at the end of the day, all you have to do is a little bit of math. So if there is a student, once again, that same student that spends $400 on groceries, $300 on dining, $200 on transportation, $100 on recurring bills, and $500 on miscellaneous, so everything else, BMO would probably net you around about $192 a year, with CIBC at $198, Tangerine at $240, and for Simplii, $276 a year. And of course, nothing is exact, but look at what happened. The card with the biggest cashback for groceries, what the students spend the most money on, didn't actually win. And this is kind of the entire point of the video. All you have to do is do the math. And of course, before someone says, hey, what about building your credit? And yeah, of course, this is the primary reason you get your credit card, just so you can get a better one with higher limit when you're older, and rewards are simply a bonus. And student credit card at the end of the day is not meant to make you rich. Instead, it gives you a way to establish credit history and understand how credit cards actually work. And in my opinion, that is, once again, dramatically more important as opposed to whether you earn $150 or $250 a year from this cashback. Because I would personally much rather see you earn 0.5% cashback on stuff while paying off your credit card every single month, as opposed to earning 3 or 5 or 10%, but losing it all by carrying balance on your card. All of these cards are charging you 21% a year divided by month if you don't actually pay it off, which is so important. So yes, please don't spend more to just earn rewards, and don't carry a balance because you think it will improve your credit score. I personally have never carried any balance in my life, and my credit score is excellent. And some of these cards prompt you to spend $1,000 in the first 3 months to earn some sort of bonus, a little cashback, maybe it's $100 in points. Please don't do that unless you really have something to buy. Don't go into debt or buy things you don't need just to trigger this bonus. That's just ridiculous. That's not optimizing. Instead, that's actually, getting played by the marketing department. And they're doing their job pretty well, let me tell you. The best strategy is very boring. Spend money you're already going to spend, put it on your credit card, tap it, pay the statement in full, and collect your rewards. That's it. And so here's my ranking. Once again, BMO for grocery heavy student. If you spend a lot on groceries, that 3% is not bad. If you end up spending on more than just groceries and you happen to drive to school, or you have a lot of subscription that you pay for yourself or your family, perhaps Tangerine would be a better option, even though it's only 2% in 3 categories. If you happen to spend more money eating out than eating in, Simplii Visa is just a no-brainer. Again, there is no other free card that will give you 4%. 4% on cashback on restaurants, bars, and coffee shops. And CIBC Mastercard, RBC Mastercard, TD Visa, they're all very much all-rounders. You can get perhaps 2% on groceries and 1% on a broad spectrum of categories, on lots of different categories. So while it's nothing exciting, if you don't want to think about this stuff, just go ahead and sign up for one of those. And again, you're probably in the same boat I was, where you already have a checking account with RBC, for example. Well, you don't even check any credit cards that other institutions provide. It seems too complicated to pay bills to a credit card that you cannot even see on your app. So you have this Tangerine app, for example, but they don't sync up necessarily. You have to enter the account number and send it and wait for 3 days. So the credit card bill is paid. It's very interesting and very intimidating when you're a student. I sure was intimidated. But please don't leave money on the table by just being scared and thinking that you should stick to everything, credit cards, checking accounts, everything in a single institution. The bank, whether it's a big or small bank, really, at the end of the day, they care about making money and they want you as a customer, but they're not necessarily married to it. They care about your spending, so just make sure to get the best card for the spending you're already doing. And honestly, if you're watching this video before you're getting your first credit card, this is the most important piece, I guess, of the whole thing. Start with just one card. Apply for one at Walmart, Superstore, at the mall, your bank, and so on. Just understand how it works, use it, pay it off every month, build your credit, and once you figure all this stuff out, you can start optimizing. You don't need a 6-card setup at 19 because some YouTube guru has told you you do. And you don't need to become a credit card points expert. There are so many, and it's very interesting once you get into it, but there is more important stuff for you to do. Study for school, for exams, and so on. And look, you definitely don't need, with how much students spend, you definitely don't need to carry 5 cards in your wallet, do all this math on the weekends in the spreadsheet just to earn another extra 15 bucks at the end of the year. Just make it simple, get the rewards, get the cash back, don't pay the interest, and just repeat. Rinse and repeat. So that's the strategy. But yeah, let me know if it makes sense, and if you wish I added some other cards to this list. Perhaps I missed some. Also, what are your thoughts on fees with annual fee? Perhaps they could be useful for students, but I just remember myself in that place, and I just couldn't fathom paying $120, for example, a year on a credit card, because I wasn't even spending that much to begin with. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, like the video, and I'll see you in the next. Take care.